In order to mix clean paint colors, it's important to choose two colors that have a similar quality or bias. The direction a color leans towards on a color wheel is known as its bias, aka does it lean towards its cooler or warmer neighboring hue. Take red for example. Red can have an orangey yellow leaning or warm bias like a cadmium red. Or it can have a purplish blue cool bias like permanent alizarin crimson. So if you're trying to mix a vibrant purple, it's important to use a cool red with a blue bias like permanent alizarin crimson with a warm blue that has a red bias like ultramarine blue. If you used a warm red like cadmium red instead of the cool red like permanent alizarin crimson, it has a trace of yellow that will cancel out any of its complementary violet. And this will lead to a dull maroon, not a vibrant purple. And the same goes if you want to make a vibrant secondary orange. You should mix a yellowish red like cadmium with a reddish yellow like cadmium yellow medium. If you were to mix a bluish red like permanent alizarin crimson with a bluish yellow like cadmium yellow, it will create a less vivid result. Though color mixing isn't always quite so simple, for example, a warm reddish yellow and a warm yellowish red work well together, but a warm yellowish green mixes best with a cool greenish yellow. But if you can identify the color temperature and its main bias, you can choose the best mixing color based on the colors you have and what you want to achieve. The color wheel is most useful as a tool to understanding color relationships and where they are in relation to each other. It's useful to be able to picture in your head the color on a color wheel, where it stands, and how two colors relate to each other, whether they lean towards each other or slightly away, because it's all about avoiding trace elements of a complementary color, which will just diminish some of the vibrancy in your mix. Because as a rule, any trace of a complementary color will neutralize or cancel out equal portions of the original color. But for some people, it can almost hurt their brain to try to guess the temperature of a color, whether it's cool or warm. And as we just said, the ability to mix clean mixtures with your paint means colors aren't dulled by the trace of its complementary, and for that you need to have an understanding of color temperature. The difficult thing is that not everyone sees color in the same way. We all have an instinctual and an emotional sense of which hues are cool and which are warm when looking at a color wheel. Even when looking at overall hues on a color wheel, there isn't exact consensus on the exact line between warm and cool colors. Most theories see red-orange as the warmest point on the color wheel and blue-green as the coolest. And a color may be described as neutral if it straddles equally between its neighboring hues. For example, phthalo blue, red shade, is often described as a neutral blue. But describing a color as neutral is slightly problematic because it really depends on the other colors on the wheel. But one of the most confusing things for artists is to know if a color is warmer or cooler if they're the same hue. For example, two different blues. We all have such different yet equally strong perceptions of color temperature, and blue seems to be the hardest to differentiate. So in this case, our instinct doesn't really help very much in terms of understanding if the blue is warm or cool. It's pretty common for painters to feel a greenish blue, like cerulean blue, is unmistakably warm, yet it's considered cool. In this case, you have to ignore your instinct. Instead, the real trick to understanding color temperature, so as not to hurt your brain trying to judge for yourself if a color is warm or cool, it's so much easier to instead think about which color it's nearest to on the color wheel. A cool greenish blue, like cerulean blue, is closer to yellow, and a warm blue, like ultramarine blue, is closer to red. We know that yellow is cooler than red because we have a much better understanding of the color temperature of overall hues, as opposed to two colors of the same hue. So the blue closer to red, like ultramarine blue, is going to be warm, and the blue closest to yellow, like a cerulean blue, is going to be cool. The same goes for red. Permanent alizarin crimson is closer to blue, but cadmium red is closer to yellow. Blue is cooler than yellow, so permanent alizarin crimson is cooler than cadmium red. And this is how you can tell if a color is cool or warm. And this is the knowledge that you need to create clean paint mixes. But if you're looking for further clarification to know whether your paint color is considered a cool or warm version of its parent hue, some paint manufacturers like Gamblin share a list of their paints and whether they're warm or cool on their websites, and that can be a really useful resource when you're trying to understand how your paints work in relation to each other. Knowing the color temperature of your exact color and how it relates to the other colors on your palette will just help you control whether your mixes are clean and clear and vibrant, or whether you're trying to go for a more subdued, naturalistic look. Either way, you'll have all the knowledge you need to control your mixes the way you want.